Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea from Marcus Evans. I would like to thank you all for attending today's webinar, Modern Cybercrime Resilience, Achieve at ZTNA with Identity Access Management, brought to you in partnership with Happiest Minds. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you can see at the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets you can use. All widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of the desktop space. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We will try to answer as many as possible during the webinar, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, we will make sure to follow up with you after the event has finalized. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the resource list. We encourage everyone to download and save any links you may find useful. For the best viewing experience, we recommend using a wired internet connection and closing any browser sessions running in the background. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, I would like to remind you to look out for an email within the next 2 hours after the event is done that will include links to watch the content on demand and download the resources. Now I would like to introduce you to Smita, Associate Director from Happiest Minds, and our moderator for today. Over to you, Susmita.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Good to see you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your, sorry, I think the slides are messed up. 1 second. Yeah. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules and come and have a conversation with us. I'll quickly take you through our agenda today. So we'll have a brief introduction about our panel members, followed by zero trust adoption into IDAM, which I will be covering. I have my good friend here, Uriel from CyberArk, who would be covering the zero trust adoption with the CyberArk controls, the different modules that are present. Followed by which we will have a panel discussion. We will be covering some important points within zero trust adoption. This could be, any risks that are there, what could be the best practices, or anything, or mostly in and around those. And finally, we will open up to the most interesting part of our conversation, which would be the Q&A. Looking forward to having some great conversations with all of you here. So please keep your questions ready and pen them down, and we'll take a look at as many as possible. But with that note, let me get to the next slide for introduction. Yep. So I have, as speakers, I have Uriel, who is the senior engineer with CyberArk, who comes with 20+ years of experience, and Adam Lalani, who is a digital transformation and information security strategist with Westminster City Council, United Kingdom. Uriel, would you like to go ahead with your introduction, please?
Yes, hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me to this great webinar today. So happy to be here and talking to everybody about this passionate topic, which is zero trust access.
Thank you, Uriel. Adam, would you like to go next?
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to meet you all. Done a fair amount of work over the last number of years on the zero trust security model. So hopefully we'll be able to provide some interesting insights for you to take away from this session. Thank you.
I'm sure. Thank you, Adam. A quick introduction about myself. I head the Identity Access Management portfolio for Happiest Minds with around 16+ years of experience, primarily into IAM consulting and transformation, data security, and privacy as well. I've been with Happiest Minds for about 6 years now. And on that note, let me give you a quick glance of what Happiest Minds is all about. I'm sure most of you would have heard about it, but for the select few who are who still haven't heard about it. Happiest Minds Technologies was launched in the year 2011 by Mr. Ashok Soota, who comes with 30 years of experience in the global IT industry. We are positioned as the mindful IT company, and we typically enable digital transformations for enterprises and technology providers. We leverage a spectrum of disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud, digital process automation, IoT, robotics, all the next-gen technologies are into, is what we specialize in. We are primarily headquartered in Bangalore with presence across 8 countries, and all the other accreditations anyways you'll be able to see on the screen here. So now let's get into the detailed discussion for which all of us are here. I think I am facing some network latency issues. Hold on. Yeah, that is better. Yeah, yeah, I think I'll just have to turn off the camera for better bandwidth. All right, that should be fine. Okay, so this is, yeah, before we get into the, the crux of the identity access management space, or why exactly are we looking at zero trust, or how is it that the IAM solutions or any other solutions for that matter address the requirements within the digital identity landscape that we see as of today, it's important that we look at how exactly the traditional identity landscape was. Now, if you see here, we have our entities, assets, and targets, which are very neatly and clearly defined and protected against your routers, firewalls, with your DMZs and your antivirus, etc. Now, entities here were primarily your employees and contractors who were accessing any of those targets, such as homegrown devices, or homegrown on-prem web applications, homegrown applications, or any critical assets of that, or mainframe systems. And primarily these employees and contractors were making use of the assets which were domain joined devices, and the kind of controls that were enforced were rather primitive, if I might use the word, as opposed to the kind of controls that we are seeing these days, right? So what we would have is the IT controllers or the IT admins enforcing the RBACs or the group policies to access these enterprise-owned devices, basically. So the fundamental difference, why we have this slide here, is to explain the fundamental difference between the traditional identity landscape and the zero trust architecture, which is the inherent trust that the traditional security heavily relied on. Now, heavy physical footprint, and which was leading to expensive BAU support, complex architectures, and elaborate DR, etc. These were all part and parcel of the traditional identity landscape. But in spite of all of these, the IT administrators still had control over the entities that were trying to access any of the targets or enterprise resources through the assets, which were again enterprise owned primarily. So there was a complete control over all these 3 entities, and that is what has changed drastically when we talk about today's architecture. Uyal, would you like to throw some light on how the security requirements within the traditional identity landscape were addressed by CyberArk?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So that was the world before, let's say like this, meaning that we had a lot of silos. We were targeting some specific assets on specific entities. We were only targeting the most critical ones, and let's say create a trusted zone or trusted zones for the plural part. But we didn't cover everything or other things that are still critical but less critical for the companies. So it was very in silos. Everything was still internal, meaning that if you wanted to connect to any kind of assets, you needed to be part of the internal company. You had some VPNs connecting from outside, but we had a lot of customers or prospects saying, it's too difficult to put that in place, or it's too expensive. So most of the things were really internal, in trusted zones and in silos. And it was not so convenient for any kind of customers. Up to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Uriel. It's just that there are few network issues, so I was just trying to see. Yeah, that's fine. So now this is what the traditional identity landscape was, and let's take a look at what it is as of today, right? This is the reason why we need the zero trust architecture. So within the last decade, if I might say, right, the kind of digital transformation and cloud adoption that different organizations are taking up, it is resulting into a perimeterless and heterogeneous infrastructure, basically. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, you have your employees, contractors, which has quickly grown into the accesses that needs to be managed for partners, customers, and if that was not enough, you have the machine identities also coming in, or more, or even referred to as the non-human identities between bots and your IoT devices. Now, this is with respect to the identity space only. And I would like you to keep in mind the three different verticals that we spoke about, or we looked at within the identity landscape as well, right? Now, within that, this diverse landscape was also working, depending on the pandemic that we are in, or thanks to the pandemic that we are in, we have a very disparate workforce as well. They are logging in from all the possible networks, home-owned devices or BYODs and smartphones and tablets, wearable devices, etc., and very insecure network channels and internet accesses, etc. And they are trying to access the resources. So the resources are primarily your infrastructure and your applications. And the infrastructure is also potentially, it could be multi-cloud, it could be on-prem, it could be SaaS. And the applications also were primarily SaaS-based applications, or those that are built on open source, which come with their own set of issues. So in a nutshell, what we are trying to establish here is that the overall architecture has gone from the simplified one, what we were used to seeing until a few years back, to an extremely complex architecture. Now, add to this the exponentially increasing threat landscape with new variants of ransomware, APTs, DDoS attacks, etc., which are coming in every other day, and the evolving regulatory compliances such as the GDPRs of the world, and you actually have a security professional's nightmare right there. So eventually, what it has come to is, although the digital transformation accelerated our time to market, and it has enhanced our organizational flexibility and scalability, and of course the ROI has improved exponentially, but it also has exposed the organizations to multiple vulnerabilities, and that too at different levels, right from the user level to asset level to application level to the infra level. And that is exactly why we need zero trust, and zero trust is the need of the hour. Adam, would you like to comment on how the traditional, identity landscape has morphed into what we see today?
Yes, I would. I mean, I really like how you've sort of framed the situation, because in many organizations that I've worked with, it is completely how you've described it. So you've just got what used to be like your old traditional style of ways of doing things, which is that you have everything internally, and then you've been tacking on these various components after that, be it commoditized cloud, SaaS applications, cloud infrastructure, et cetera. So what you find is that in the old days, it was much easier. You would just trust everything inside your perimeter, inside your network, and you would distrust everything from the outside. And then you'd combat that using things like VPN and RSA tokens and things of that nature in order to securely have people connecting in. Whereas now we find ourselves in a world where we can't trust anything anymore, whether it's internal, external. There is just this complete blurring of what a corporate network should look like. It's changing every day. Today I'm sitting at home. Tomorrow I could be in the office. The next day I could be on a train going up to Scotland and still needing to access corporate resources. So It's really, really interesting that, it's in the old days, when you had things just that you were looking at from an internal perspective, it was far more easier to control. Now that element of control has been lost, and that's where using Zero Trust helps to bring that control back to those that need to control it. I mean, I can say more. I don't know if you'd like me to.
Sure, Adam. Probably we can cover that in the next slides where we talk about the controls in general. So yeah, we can cover that. But yeah, I understand the gist of it. Like, the flexibility has increased, as you were saying, but then going beyond that, the vulnerabilities has also increased. So
yes, it's very much like an arms race. So with like increased opportunities, you have increased risk.
Exactly.
You fix one end, and it's just a seesaw that just keeps flipping from one end to another.
And we need to strike that balance. Right. Uriel, what are your views on how the modern identity landscape is looking like, and how CyberArk would have also, I'm sure it has, upgraded itself to adopt to all the requirements or the vulnerabilities that are coming up to in this kind of network that we see today?
Yeah, indeed. In the last 20 years that CyberArk exists, we evolved with what people are doing with their networks, with their assets, with their resources in general. So, in fact, we adapted to the needs. And as you said, we are connecting from everywhere, from every kind of environment, from laptops to even phones or tablets or any kind of things, to applications on infrastructure who are hosted by us, data centers, or in the cloud, public or private cloud. So it's very difficult. So we adapted our solutions, our mindset, to provide the most secure way to our customers to access there with a zero trust mindset too. Because as we've said, we don't before we were trusting people only internally. Now people are coming from everywhere. Internal, it doesn't mean anymore anything. It's from where we're connecting to where we want to connect, with different levels of authentications. So what we're willing to do is to provide in a production way best feeling for our customers, but with a high level of security.
Thank you, Uriel. So yeah, exactly. As you said, there is nothing called as a user. It really doesn't matter whether it's an employee or a contractor who is logging in and to what resource, right? All of these are equally important, and the policies need to enforce at each and every level that we talk about, and that's what makes zero trust even more interesting. Now, I will quickly look at the pillars of the zero trust, right? What exactly is zero trust? So the fundamental aspect what zero trust relies on is never trust and always verify. And as Uriel was also saying, assume breach. It does not matter whether it is an internal employee or if it is an external party that access has been given to. Zero trust has been established around these 5 fundamental, foundation pillars, and not just your network. So these pillars actually represent the primary dimension of an enterprise's entire digital estate. So it has your, users, which forms a very, very important part of your overall zero trust architecture, followed by the devices that they use, the network that they connect to, and the resources that they are accessing via applications and data, of course. So the idea or the fundamental aspect would be, in order to establish a zero trust environment, would be to take enough steps and enforce enough policies so that all the user activities, whether it is within each of these foundations, right, whether it is within network and across these, whether it is across the applications or devices, each of the user activities and the accesses that are being utilized by the user, there is a trustworthiness associated with it. So this forms the pillar of, these are the fundamental aspects of your zero trust architecture. Now, if we quickly look at the next slide, is where I have actually gone ahead and jotted down the focal points across each of these domains or across each of these pillars. So if you see there, we see that for users there are multiple things that are listed out. So as we had discussed earlier also, there are the human identities and the non-human identities also. So these users define the control plane of the zero trust architecture. This is the most important aspect of it. And once an identity is granted access to a resource, data can flow to a variety of different devices. It could be, it could be your IoT devices, to your smartphones, to your BYODs or partner managed devices, your on-premise workload, so on and so forth. The applications is where again there are different focal points that are listed out here, and I will explain in the next slide how exactly are the controls that are enforced in here. But this is essentially where the interface is provided by which the data is consumed by the user. So these could be your legacy on-premise applications, or it could be something which is lifted and shifted from on-prem to the cloud, or it could be a cloud-borne application in itself, right? And data, this here. So data is where ultimately, the security teams are all figuring out solutions to ensure that the data has been protected. And network and devices. So network is where, of course, all kind of networks should get covered into this. You have your on-premise, hybrid, all of these containers, OT and IoT. What we have typically seen is that while organizations are very intent on taking care of their IT environments, and there are security programs that are running in, the OT and the IoT space of it sort of takes a back seat in it. So that is something that needs to be avoided, and the zero trust adoption needs to be looked at in its entirety. And of course, the devices. So all of the devices that we discussed, right? These needs to be, the policies needs to be enforced at each and every level for these devices. Let me quickly take you through. Yes. What we have seen so far is what is zero trust, what are the fundamental aspects of zero trust, and the kind of devices or the kind of focal points within each of these domains that needs to be kept in mind while the zero trust is being adopted. Now what we are looking at is an overall what kind of practical controls can be imposed on for a zero trust architecture, right? So what it means is these have been mapped across each of the foundations that we spoke about. So we at user level, at endpoint level, at network level, at app level, and at the critical data level as well. So what it means is validate each and every user, no matter if it is an internal user, if it is an external user, if it is a third party. It needs to be, every single user needs to be validated if they are accessing any of these, any of the network resources. And how exactly is that done? It is done by multi-factor authentication enforcements, your context-based authentication, dynamic privilege escalations, RBACs, and application workflow management, etc. An important part of this would be the user lifecycle management. The user lifecycle management needs to be a complete automated process to ensure that the terminated employees do not retain access to any of the critical assets. So those kind of controls are usually or need to be enforced at the user level. Next would be at the endpoint level. We already spoke about the plethora of endpoint devices that are available for the users for the disparate workforce identities to utilize, right? This in turn, what it does is it is creating a very massive attack surface, surface area. So what we need to do for enforcing or for taking control of the endpoints is to ensure that we have some software-defined microperimeters. How that can be done is through some agent-based solutions so that we can remove the local admin credentials. There is application whitelisting enforced, dynamic privilege escalations is there, and endpoint MFA can be done, automatic application executions are controlled. So it's not like, because there is the person has admin credentials on the endpoint, if it is an enterprise owned if it is an enterprise owned device, that is, in that case there would be applications that will get executed at the back end. So those kind of policies need to be in place so that these vulnerabilities that rise out of these are enforced or taken care of. And also measures should be in place to ensure that the threat vectors like your viruses and malware, ransomware, etc. are also addressed. So that is against validate every user and validate all the endpoints. And next is ratify the complete network. When we say ratify the complete network, as I was telling, it should not be just the IT space that we are talking about. It should have your IT, it should have your IoT, it should have your OT, it should have your RPAs, all of that included in it. And what it means is, suppose, we have a lot of critical assets in the environment, right? And Zero Trust recommends microsegmentation to contain attacks. Now, this involves, when we say microsegmentation, to some extent, it would also involve that these critical assets are first and foremost identified and they are categorized, and then they are moved into some, specifically certain controls, such as maybe strong access policies there, or password rotations that could be enforced, the SSH key rotation, the just-in-time provisioning, so that time-based access is provided. Command restriction, of course, you wouldn't want anybody to have the access to go and shut down your domain controller, right? So those kind of accesses would be need to be enforced at the network level. At application level, the recommendation is to authorize each and every application. So we spoke about the various areas or the various entities where you would find the applications. Now, within each of the applications, the APIs needs to be managed. So these could be both owned or consumed by us, the embedded credentials within the applications also. So there are a lot of times that we have seen that credentials are embedded within applications, which are often, hard-coded as plain text into your scripts or codes. So these are absolute no-nos when we talk about Zero Trust, because there is a whole lot of threat or vulnerabilities that can be exposed or that can be utilized at that point in time by the hackers. And these policies, again, I am saying time and again, these need to be enforced at each and every level. It could be your CI/CD pipeline, it could be your code repositories, it could be at the admin level. At all the levels, these kind of policies needs to be enforced. And last but not the least is where we talk about securing the critical data. The data is, again, enough analysis has to be done in terms of what exactly is the critical data, what is the sensitive data that is required, and these data needs to be access control. So these data could be sitting across your databases, your data lakes, and your critical assets. It could be anywhere. But these data needs to be access controlled by the next level of, by all of these that we spoke about, right? The context-based authentication or privilege escalation or time-bound access that we spoke. And there would be some very critical data that can be stored maybe in encrypted formats with access controls, as well as into some encrypted vaults or so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, this is a brief snapshot about how identity forms the crux of the Zero Trust architecture and the kind of controls that need to be placed at every pillar of Zero Trust. Yes. Uriel, over to you. If you would be able to tell us in terms of, the kind of controls that are there within CyberArk and how it can help an organization in their Zero Trust journey.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kalyani. Sorry, Susmita. Kalyani on the other side. So yeah, about CyberArk and how we can cover all of these Zero Trust needs. So if we want to first go with the users, because users are very important here, we can cover that with Cyborg Identity. Cyborg Identity will cover mainly the multi-factor authentication, the single sign-on aspects, the different users who can access from an environment to another environment, and being sure that they are the right person who can access to it. So we will include multi-factor authentication through phone, through mail, or through tokens, which is software tokens, not hardware tokens, because we believe that hardware tokens, everybody are losing them at some point. But software tokens are better use for everybody. And single sign-on is very important for us too, because once you're logged in, you don't want to relog every single time. So, and we want to reuse the existing security and being sure that you are still the right persons who can connect in there. We will use remote access, because as we've said before, we are connecting from everywhere today. As Adam said, he was working from home because of COVID and everything, but it's easier for some production part too, where we can work from the office or from the train or from everywhere. But at some point, we need to connect to these environments in a secure way. So we've created CyberArk Remote Access exactly for this, because today we still believe in some VPNs part, because VPNs can be still interesting to do some certain type of work. But if we don't want to multiply VPNs everywhere, or if we don't want to have agents installed on all of our laptops and everything, we've developed CyberArk Remote Access for that. CyberArk Remote Access is an agentless module, which means that from my PC, I can access to my CyberArk environment from outside. Either I can be identified from CyberArk, or I can be identified by a third party, like a third-party vendor, where I get an invitation to join, for example. And I don't need to install any agent on my laptop. It will be MFA with mail or phone based if needed. And I will be identified for a certain period of time, or for full time for certain persons. But I will be accessing to the CyberArk environment on a secure tunnel, and everything will be recorded on what I'm doing. Going further on the endpoints now, we need to validate these endpoints. So how do I validate that? It's easier to know from where I'm connecting. So once again, I can use CyberArk Identity to do that, and being sure that when I'm requesting to access to an environment, I'm the right person. And if my laptop and my phone, for example, are not located at the same, at least country, I would say, or region, it might be canceled. So we will be able to see if there are any mismatch on some connections. But moreover, we will go on the endpoints with Endpoint Privilege Manager is ensuring me that when I'm using my laptop or accessing to a server with administrative privilege, I have the rights on this environment, meaning that on my laptop, I don't need anymore to be an administrator. But as for sometimes, I need to run some specific applications or modify my IP address, for example, as I'm an engineer. But if I'm not an administrator, I can do it. So the agent installed on my laptop will automatically upgrade. It will automatically elevate my credentials for that, because I will be allowed to. Of course, there will be some policies pushed in there. So we will validate what I can do on your laptops and on the servers, on the Windows servers too, on the Linux servers too. We can do what you are entitled to do. So that's very important to check. Moving forward on the complete network, Privileged Access Manager is our core product, meaning that from there, we will store the credentials or login, passwords, secrets too, because we were talking about human to machine connections, but we're taking care a lot of applications to applications communications, or That's for the old world. On the new world, it's much more CI/CD pipelines, for example, DevOps, and we want to secure all the secrets into a single vault. And from there, we want to be sure that we will provide the users to connect to the right application, to the right environments, without knowing the password or the secrets, because they will be retrieved from the vault, and with a single sign-on connecting to the end environment. It can be done with permanent privileges on the privilege access manager, or with just-in-time privileges, meaning that we'll be able to give the rights for an external person or a certain person for just a short period of time. So we can do this kind of thing. Client Entitlement Manager is an essential part for Zero Trust, meaning that we are all working with multi-cloud environments like Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud environments. In these environments, we need to trust people who can do the administrations of these different clouds. The problem is all the permissions that all these people can have is massive. We have more than 7,000 permissions available on AWS. And I don't think any kind of AWS admin knows them all. So as it is convenient on a production point of view, most admins are like not full admins, but high-level admins. But do they really need all these rights? Not very sure about that. So we've created Cloud Entitlement Manager to review the rights of the IAM users in these cloud environments, and reviewing them and giving a report about it, and even doing some remediation, meaning that I will, for example, watch for my rights in an AWS environment, and it will say, yes, Uriel has too many rights in this environment. So here are our remediation plan to remove these rights because, well, it doesn't fit to his job, or being honest. So Cloud Entitlement Manager is a separate product, and it's very useful when you have multi-cloud or very AWS or Azure environments or Google Cloud environment. Finally, for managing all of our secrets and applications environments, we have Conjuring Secret Manager. This module is really designed for CI/CD pipelines or applications that requires constantly credentials to run or to run jobs or to run tasks. It's very important for us because we are seeing too much in the developers world, login and passwords hard-coded in playbooks or in different scripts, and we want to remove that from here. So we just want these scripts, these playbooks, these environments to gather, to retrieve these secrets and passwords on the most productive way and secured way from a secured environment, and we'll be able to trace this kind of thing. Same for the old applications. So we have our application module, which can do this on the embedded credential on the old code repositories that we have. And now we are moving to Conjure Secret Manager for every CI/CD tools. So, oops, sorry, was a little bit fast. And finally, for every kind of sensitive data access, being sure that people have the right access, and we will monitor what they're doing, because we can do that because it's not their personal data, it's their company data that we can monitor. So people who are accessing admin accounts within servers or networks and everything, we will use Privilege Access Manager. So Privilege Access Manager exists on premise or in a SaaS environment, so we can host it for you, or you can have it on your data center or provided directly by Happiest because Happiest is an MSP partner for us, so they will be able to help you in deploying and administrating this environment for you. So Privileged Access Manager is top of breed now for the PAM. We've been awarded once again by SC Europe Awards this year. We are one of the leaders in the Gartner to lead the identity security and the privileged access management. And finally, when we gather all of our modules, it forms the CyberArk Identity Security Platform. So in this platform, you will be able to authenticate, so verify every user and their devices. You'll be able to authorize, so just in time, giving the right privilege for the user to get to the right assets. In accessing this asset, we will secure and isolate, monitor all accesses, meaning that we will record everything in the audit, and we will be able to send you qualified alerts on what is happening in the session. Because recording is great, but having alerts in live on what's going on maybe some misbehavior thing, on what's going on in the session is better. So we can interact with CM, sending qualified alerts, so your analyst or security people can bring their tools and remediate on what happened. So CyberArk Identity, Endpoint Privilege Manager, Remote Access, Privilege Access Manager, Cloud Entitlement Manager, and Secrets Manager are full identity security platform. And I'll hand over to Smita.
Thank you, Uriel. And let's get into the more into the panel discussion. And the first question being the real world problems that we see in the zero trust adoption. Adam, would you be able to tell us, because you come with an immense experience, you've worked in different geographies and different enterprises in security roles. So if you could help us understand, while you were adopting organizations in their zero trust journey, what were the real world problems? Oh, I think he has got disconnected. All right, not a problem. We are having network issues today. Okay, Uriel, would you like to take this answer, please?
Yeah, sorry, I was just disconnected, so I didn't hear the question. That's a full day of internet. I don't know what's happening.
I know.
Sorry, can you repeat?
It? Today
yeah,
has
definitely.
been really bad.
It's crazy.
Right. So the question is the real world problems in zero trust adoption. So when you come at it from the vendor perspective, right, what are those issues that you have seen while actually adopting? It looks all good on the paper in terms of approach, and these are the fundamental pillars, and these are the controls that need to be in. But what happens when we actually go in there into enterprise networks and see how this can be enforced?
Okay, so how it can be enforced. So in fact, we have all the technology to do it, but now it's much more a human part. So we need to have discussions with the multiple teams. We have to understand what is done now, and from what is done now, having a clear plan on the next, not months, but sometimes years. And that's why we created we often create with our customers blueprints, because we're just building a new house. So we need blueprints to do that. So we know from where to start. We have a starting point, and we want to go to an ending point. Ending is a large word because we don't talk about too much projects. We talk about program in the zero trust access, because, as you've said, we are in continuous improvement, continuous new applications, new environments, new things. So we are continuously evolving. So it's much more program with different steps to get in there. One of the steps is discovery. We, of course, ask a lot of questions to our customers, like you do with your own customers, to develop things. But we trust everybody, of course, about what they're saying to us. But sometimes we need to verify if there are no misbehavior from some specific people. So we are doing some assessment. from there. So we have a specific tool for that, which is called DNA. So DNA is a simple tool that you can run and gather information on Windows and Linux systems, like every kind of accounts that are onboarded in this kind of systems. And we will tell you if these accounts are dangerous or not. Why? Because we will still see how long, since when the password hasn't been changed. Or, for example, if it can be breached by a vulnerability, a well-known vulnerability like by the hash. So if we can see if the hash is the same from a server to another, so we can help in this kind of things. So it's a good starting point to move on to the next steps within our program and blueprint.
Right. I also agree with you there, Uriel, because we also have our service line offerings in the same space of course, it's a very simple thing. Until and unless you don't know what you're trying to protect or what you're trying to transform, you wouldn't know where to go from it. And one of the real world problems that I have also seen with organizations is that lack of vision, right? So first thing, there would be organizations who wouldn't understand what is the existing as is. So they do not understand what are the gaps that are there or what kind of remediation should be in place before we even embark on the zero trust journey, and what kind of controls can be tweaked, and then get the new product or the new solution in there and ensure that it's a streamlined approach, basically, right? So those are some of the things. So in line with that is also where we help our customers to understand what is the existing as is. First and foremost, where are you? What are the gaps? What are the risks? What should be the mitigation for you? And then, as you said, the blueprint. So this is also where we do the discovery also using automated solutions such as the DNS scan, as you mentioned, right? That and a few others. And we identify where we stand as of now. We define a to-be state. We also make use of the solutions, the offerings from CyberArk, like the blueprint that you were mentioning. And then a streamlined approach, a phase-wise approach, that implementation, phase 1, these are the things that will be covered. Phase 2, this is what will be covered. There will be feasibility studies also done to understand that the existing technology landscape should be adapted to the products that are coming in to align the organization to the zero trust architecture, right? So yeah, we are in consensus there in terms of the actual issues that we see in the zero trust adoption. Shall we get to the next question?
Sure.
Yep. Yep. Are there any risks for zero trust adoption? Have you seen any? There are different schools of thoughts here, but I'd like to know your views.
Yeah, totally. Well, there are risks everywhere. Okay, when you decide to take a strategy, there are risks behind. Zero trust implies some risk, meaning that if you don't trust anyone, then sometimes we might block people who really need to work. And that happened to some customers who were too strict on their policies. So that's once again it's much more a human, and being sure that policies are well driven. And okay, security is one thing, but production is another thing. So we need to have the right balance between both of them. And yes, well, the main risk is if we are going to zero trust fully, sometimes we won't be able to work too much. So let's not be too much secure, but let's be fair and have the right balance for everybody.
I agree with you. I mean, it's always a security consultant's main issue to strike a balance between the usability and the security, and that's exactly what is something where we need to sort of reach on a consensus, that how much is too much and how much is too little. That kind of analysis needs to be done, and those security controls needs to be enforced at each of those fundamentals that we discussed. One more thing that I have seen, I wouldn't call it as a risk, but a sort of a challenge that I have seen, right? There are customers that I have worked with where, when we start the journey, right, we do the analysis, assessment, feasibility study, we give a complete roadmap, phase-wise implementation plan, all of it. And we are all set for the zero trust adoption journey, right? But what happens after that is, maybe because of some, budget constraints or so, the customers sort of think that it is okay that they can do it themselves without proper security consultants on board, and they try and do it in-house. Now, what happens with that is that although there is a plan in place, but when there is a comparison between the budget and the controls that need to be in place and the kind of streamlining that is required, the modules that needs to be integrated, the use cases that needs to be defined, those kind of get tweaked. And then these solutions sort of work in silos. And Zero Trust needs all the security controls to work in tandem. It needs to work in its entirety to provide the ROI to the organizations, right? So that is something that I have seen happen, where these work in silos, and then, I mean, there is no point, right? It could be just another implementation. It's not necessarily a Zero Trust adoption, basically. So yeah, those are my 2 cents on the risks on Zero Trust adoption. Let's look at the next one. Yep, what is it? Yeah. Best practices to achieve Zero Trust. Yeah, we did touch upon it a little bit at Uriel. Would you like to add any of the points that we may have missed?
Well, not really. It's really, once again, humans. So we really need to see from where we are starting from, and let's build on it. We don't need to wipe out everything that have been done. Let's start with some things that works and go to the best Zero Trust that we can do. Once again, full Zero Trust sometimes leads to, well, can't work anymore. So let's get the best practice here from where we're going to where we want to go.
Exactly, and that is the reason why that feasibility study has to be done, because the technology landscape that exists within the organization, that needs to be streamlined and that needs to be capitalized first to its to its maximum potential, and then the additional solutions brought in, which will work in tandem. It works together as its entirety. And another important thing which you also touched upon, right? It is not a sprint. It's a marathon, and it's not a plug and play that it will just start working from the next day onwards, basically. So these are the best practices which needs to be kept in mind while we are trying to achieve Zero Trust. I think we have. On panel discussions,
some
these
questions,
were the only.
yes.
Yeah, let's take a look at the questions.
I've got one which is interesting from Anascan on. Now organization recruits employee right from the workforce home, and yes, they can disguise and get all the required privilege, and that's why that we don't want this and the required privilege access. They are recruited for a specific job. So if their specific job is only Linux admin, then they should access only to the Linux environment and not the Windows and the rest. And that's why we are here to monitor on what they're doing too on this environment. So we want to be sure that these people are only connecting to what they are connecting to, and we want to monitor what they are doing. And if they are doing anything which is wrong, we will be able to send the required alerts to these environments. But it's just an evolution on what happened before, because this kind of thing happened when these people were working internally at the company, because they were using USBs, they were using a lot of things to extract this kind of environment. So working from home or working from internal of the company, today for us, it's exactly the same. And we want to put the countermeasures about it.
Right. And just to add to that also, Uriel and Anas, to answer your question, there will always be, we always recommend that there should be role-based access controls or least privilege access that is granted. But as you are saying, if the employee is already within the organization, how do you know if they are not misusing, right? And that is the reason why, if at all they are accessing your critical assets, their behavior needs to be analyzed, and sessions, right? Any of the critical assets, like for example, they have access to your domain controllers, to your network devices, to your data lakes, etc. Your accesses needs to be monitored, and until and unless not explicitly required, no heavy or high privileged credentials or accesses should not be provided. And even if they are provided, they should be monitored. So we can enforce things like command restrictions, etc. And then the behavioral analysis of the person will also need to be enforced upon. So if at all this person who claims to be a legitimate employee of your organization, if they try and access the resources at a set time, which they are not supposed to, or if they are trying to access from a different network, that those kind of anomalies will get detected by any of these contextual, contextual identity access or multi-factor authentication that can be enforced. So it has to be a combination of granular controls plus threat analytics and user behavioral analytics, that needs to be enforced, and that will take care of the issue that you just mentioned. I hope we answered your question.
And another question from Anas is about Okta entering PAM in April. Yes, entering PAM, as we entered MFA and SSO last year by acquiring a company called Idaptive, and we integrated Idaptive in our product portfolio, which is called now Workforce Identity and CyberArk Identity. So we are there already. And we really believe that it's much more an identity security market that we're addressing now than a privileged access management market or only a single sign-on market. So that's very important to work with, and we will evolve in this market to protect the identity. So we are evolving to MFA and SSO since last year, and we are going more and more on the management for the access management for workforce. So for these environments, we're not using the PAM solution. We're just using Idaptive, which is called now Workforce Identity.
Thanks, Uriel. Do we have any other questions?
About the projects that can last.
Yeah.
Very important question. As we said before, we don't see really this as projects. We see this as programs, because everything is evolving. We have new applications, new environments. Companies are acquiring new companies, so we need to onboard them and being sure that these people are secured and can access to the right things. So it's still in evolution. So we are much more in agile environments, so maybe agile projects, but we prefer to consider this as programs. So I don't want to fear anyone about that, but there is no real end about this, because it's in constant evolution. But it's good. It means that it's live, and we can evolve with your digital transformation and your next steps within your company.
Absolutely, Uriel. I completely agree with what you just said. So yes, it is a marathon and not a sprint. And there could be different phases that we define, so that you will have a quicker ROI when we have the first phase implemented. The most critical of the issues will get addressed in the first phase, followed by the second phase. But that enhancement is a cycle, and that to determine the duration will also be difficult, because it would also depend on the size of the organization, the size of the organization, the vertical that you belong to, the kind of compliance requirements that the organization has. So all of this sort of contribute into it. But if we have to actually do that analysis for a particular organization where we do the feasibility study, etc., we'll be able to give you a proper time-bound roadmap as to how and when these controls can be enforced, and the journey. So we'll be able to give a better clarity. Generically, defining the timelines would be a little difficult. How to
ensure that zero trust controls that are implemented remains relevant? That's a tricky one. Well, you need to have very regular process. So meaning doing any kind of audit, regular auditing, to be sure that they are still relevant, that people are still connecting to the right environment. So it comes through audits and help from any kind of external auditors, or help from Happiest Mind as your preferred partner with that. So it's much more on the different process and the human part that you are sure that controls are implemented.
Exactly, Uriel. So that is where the time-bound analysis needs to be done. If you remember the architecture diagram that we discussed, right? Your threat analytics, your governance, and your advanced controls, the analysis part of it, right? There has to be a study of this, which goes on as part of your zero trust identity adoption journey, right? So that is a cyclic journey. So that would include recertification of accesses to your critical assets, to your critical applications, so on and so forth. So that is where the journey, or this is where Happiest Minds will be able to help you with in terms of ensuring that this remains relevant with in line with your vision for the zero trust. And with that, I will hand this over to Andrea. Are you there?
Thanks, Smita. Thank you very much, both of you, for your input today. I hope you can hear me all well. I would like to also thank the audience that joined us today, and send you a quick reminder to look out for an email within the next 2 hours that will include links to download today's material. We'll also add your feedback, so if you could take a minute to answer our very brief survey that will pop up on your screens at the end of the session, that will be very much appreciated. On behalf of Happiest Minds and CyberArk, who joined us today, and Marcus Evans Online Events, we would like to thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you will be listening to our next webinar. Thank you very much, Uriel. Thank you, Susmita, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.